Okay, let's begin. So, seeing people in chat. So today and next class, we're talking about the movie business. Today also, I want to give you a heads up about an online discussion, which has some points attached to it. So that'll be our final thing before your research essay 2 is due. And then we got the final exam, and that'll be it for evaluations for this class. Start with a little film history. We've got some videos, we've got content. So motion picture industry, and one of the most important 20th century industries, established a certain amount of content genres for the television industry that was to follow, which, as we know, also pilfered from the radio industry's different content. But certain things like the Western, the detective story, the melodrama, the romance, a lot of that came out of movie industry as well. There's also, in terms of visuals, our first visual mass medium, and so there's important aspects of that that we could probably, get right into. So, an interesting thing to start out with is, rather than just the technology itself, to try to think about the society at the time. So, in the late 19th century and early 20th century, so we're talking from the 1875 on period up through to, let's say, 1930s, which are largely regarded as both the golden age of radio and the golden age of movies. But that 50-year period saw a big transition in American life, with enormous amounts of immigration to this country, and also clustering in urban centers. So even Americans who were well established on farms and in rural settings flocked to the big cities as more jobs became available and were centralized in the city due to mechanization, factories. You can build stuff, you can get jobs in places like New York City, Detroit, Chicago. And there's a big social change in that case from people who are grounded in a community that they can know, where probably generations, came up in the same place with the same prospects. When you look at urbanization, you get a lot of people who leave that kind of comfortable culture and move into one which is far more challenging to the individual. You don't necessarily know what job you're going to do. You don't know who's going to live next to you. And of course, this sense of displacement is even stronger if you come from another country with a different language. So especially in places like New York, which sees the beginnings of the motion picture industry, you have a large segment of the population which is undergoing big social and even psychic transformations at the time due to these, possibilities. And in this day and age, we tend to take them all for granted. A lot of us, for generations, we've lived in a more mobile, impersonal, alienating type of urban existence where your job is up to you to decide the person you're going to be with. If you're going to be with anybody, is up to you to decide. So many decisions, hugely important decisions, devolve onto the individual now. It's hard to imagine a time where most of those things were already decided for you and taken care of because of the community you lived in and the people who lived around you. So it's a big change. And so one of the ways to look at the movie industry, the rise of this incredibly powerful visual technology, is not only as a technology, as a business that grows up, but also as a part of a massification, which was social, and also as a solution to a kind of a social and psychic problem, which is who shall we be? Who shall we become? We're now able to become so much. Who can we become? And so the movie industry is a history of stars, of movie stars. And you could look at them as a kind of a solution to that problem. Who is going to guide us if it's no longer, tradition, or even, the church that you always went to, and so on. And so, you get the start of a star system and incredibly intense fandoms and interactions with those stars, or with the images of those stars. And it goes on to this day, with a heightened celebrity culture and interest in, the personal lives of people who, in many cases, aren't any different from us. But we can see this incredible technology putting them before us, and now like a 100-year history of adoring fandoms, looking to others for, ideas about how they should live, what they should do, and whether those are misplaced or not. It seems that's what's going on. So in the early days, even prior to this technology, baseball stars were really huge, performers were really huge, and starting in the 1870s with the telegraph, these stars used to move around the country. Baseball teams, of course, went from city to city and played each other, but the appearances of baseball stars would be organized and publicized, and people would flock to see them. And when your team was on the road, people looked to the telegraph to get the information about, not just the scores, but what kind of incredible exploits were the sports stars involved in, perfect game, or, leading the batting records for the season and such. So that predated the movies. But even in the early days of movie stars, they used to drive them around in trains and stop off in different cities. And again, it would be publicized, and people would flock to, just to get close to Mary Pickford or Charlie Chaplin. So the circulation of stars were depended a lot, not just on the cinema technology, but also on trains, moving them around, and on telegraphs, which could, send news back home or to anybody about, the latest on what your star is doing. And of course, very quickly, public relations and sort of soft journalism, entertainment journalism became a big part of it too, promoting stars. So stars have always been integral to the movie business. But for, the first 50 years of the movie business, most stars were employed by studios in a studio system. It's only later, after the 1950s, when television kind of breaks open the movie business anyway, that stars begin to get the upper hand, to the point now where, the involvement of a star will get a movie made, and if it won't, well then, you better be one of a few genres like, Marvel or something like that. Otherwise, you're pretty much don't have a project. So stars have become even more a key part of the, key power players in the business than they were early on. So we'll get to that part of the history next class, I guess. And so in this class, we just want to look at the early history and some, the structure of the business and how it developed. So, early on, the first motion pictures are kind of a novelty, and people pay just for the interest of seeing, a moving picture. My goodness. That thing that you see there is a Zoetrope. And here in San Francisco, there was a very famous movie company called American Zoetrope, which was Francis Ford Coppola's production company when he was a big player in the 70s and 80s. So I mean, there'd be a bunch of pictures, everyone with a slightly different pose. And if you look through a Zoetrope, if you look through the slits, the pictures will appear, as a single picture that kind of dances and moves. Anybody seen a zoetrope? You've seen some before?
Seen it on film or whatever.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. They'll have them like Exploratorium and stuff. Will have kind of variants of it. It's pretty cool. So it's if you pass enough moving images in front of us, we'll get that illusion of continuous motion. So Edison, who invented so many different things, had a movie studio. And so they were just doing very short films to start out with, but here are some of Edison's first productions. And, does this have voiceover? I think we could do with that. So this would be how a lot of people would have seen these films in large tents or in other places like where people would gather for different kinds of entertainments, boardwalks and stuff. So they went from just recording movement to little skits like this. Little comedy.
This might be the most famous one.
It is a big one, yeah. So these would have been filmed with hand crank cameras in studios with natural light. A loop. There you go. So just some of that. So early on, just movement is enough of a novelty to get people interested. There's a rapid technological development from there. Both the film stock that they started using acetate, so a clear film stock that was easier to process and develop and duplicate. Movie lighting, of course, and motorized cameras and stuff. So there's pretty rapid technological development. Aesthetically, there's the invention of a close-up, which is often attributed to D.W. Griffith. This is a feature-length silent film called Birth of a Nation, which is more than a little racist in its
very
Ku Klux Klan sort of heroized in this film. Yeah, there's a lot of this history. You get a sense of the society and its prejudices alongside of all of these achievements and stuff. So at a certain point, weather and the economics of getting out of the East Coast where real estate is more expensive brings production to California, Los Angeles, Hollywood as well. And a studio system emerges, which are our first kind of conglomerates where everything goes on from creating the stuff to distributing it in theater chains that are being built up, and some very powerful Hollywood studios emerge. And they control both production, distribution, and also, they put stars on salary, and they exploit them, making tons of movies of them each year. And again, this is the visual technology of the time. So it's there's no TV. So if you're into visual storytelling, then this is it. So we have a couple of historical summaries here, which are quite well done by the Crash Course series from PBS. So these are rapid fire, but historically very interesting summaries of this emerging business. So let's just start out with the first one. Let's see where we get with this.
The celebrities, the scandals! I'm not talking about Bennifer or Brangelina. Are they still famous? Oh, I'm kind of out of touch. But not out of touch with the golden age of silent cinema when stars rose and fell. Studios perfected the mass production of films, and American movies dominated the global film market. In some ways, it was very different from the Hollywood we know today. Movie studios wielded enormous power. They kept stars and directors under tight control, the movies they made were silent, and a ticket would set you back a whopping 10 or 25 cents. On the other hand, a lot of the patterns set during this time still seem awfully familiar today. Studios marketed films on the power of their stars. Genres like gangster movies and romantic comedies took hold and flourished, and audiences craved gossip about the private lives of celebrities. To understand the world as it is, sometimes you have to go back to where it all began. And for Hollywood, that's the silent era.
Ew. Was that TikTok?
Film was going in a lot of different directions after the First World War. In Germany, filmmakers drew on the Expressionist movement to manipulate their films' mise-en-scène, creating groundbreaking horror films. In Russia, Soviet filmmakers were using cinema to perfect the art of propaganda through revolutionary editing techniques. And in the US, the Hollywood studio system was positioning itself to dominate the rest of the world. Within film studios, the entire filmmaking process took place, from conceiving, writing, and shooting the films to marketing and distribution. The studios had chosen California for its film-friendly sunny weather, its proximity to all kinds of terrain, and its distance from Thomas Edison, who spent much of the 1910s fighting for control of the American film industry from his base in New Jersey. In the early days of the silent era, 3 film studios ruled them all: the famous Players-Lasky Corporation, which would eventually become Paramount Pictures, Lowe's Inc., which began as a theater chain, and First National Pictures. Not only did these 3 dominate the marketplace, they exercised near complete control over the creative and personal lives of their stars, writers, and directors. Filmmakers often had to choose between following the studio's orders or abandoning their careers. Then, 4 of the most powerful figures in early silent cinema came together to create their own film studio. In 1919, 2 directors, Charlie Chaplin and D.W. Griffith, and 2 stars, Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford, founded United Artists. Their goal was to give filmmakers more control over their films and a greater percentage of the profits. Cha-ching! Is what I assume they would say. Of course, not many filmmakers could afford to go out on their own like that, so the contract system would continue for several more decades. In 1924, the most powerful studio emerged when Lowe's purchased Goldwyn Pictures and Louis B. Mayer Productions to create Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, better known as MGM. Which led to MGM Studios, which led to Tower of Terror, and if you've been on Tower of Terror, that's a pretty fun time. This is a process that would get repeated throughout the 1920s and 1930s as studios merged or sold or split apart. Probably because it was the Prohibition and they didn't have anything else to do. By the end of the era, most American films were being made at studios whose names you might recognize from the multiplex today. Not only United Artists and MGM, but also Warner Brothers, Fox, Universal, and Columbia Pictures. Now, while the corporate structure of these companies kept changing, the process by which they were making films was becoming remarkably stable and efficient. Unlike me. The major studios became very good at churning out large-scale commercial movies with mass appeal. One of the leading innovators in setting up the way studios worked was a man named Thomas H. Ince. Like D.W. Griffith, Ince came to film as a failed actor. He directed his first film in 1910, and by 1913, he was making as many as 152 reelers a year. His biggest impact on film came by applying the lessons of mass production to the actual making of movies. Prior to Ince, most films were overseen by a director-cameraman, a single person who conceived the story, worked with the actors, and operated the camera. Ince broke those roles into separate jobs. A screenwriter to conceive the story and write the script, a director to make creative decisions on set and work with the actors, an editor to assemble the footage, a producer to supervise the project from inception to final cut, and a studio head to oversee the entire studio. While other filmmakers had played around with these roles, it was Ince who standardized them into a system still used today. By 1912, he earned enough money to buy a ranch west of Hollywood where he built his own studio, a place he called Inceville. Yep. It was here where the first permanent exterior sets were built, made to resemble far-flung locations like a cowboy saloon, a little Swiss street, or a Japanese village. And as Ince worked to define the roles and streamline the means of production, he was able to triple the output of his studio. Though he died quite young in 1924, Ince's impact on film production was thorough, widespread, and lasting. Now, Max Sennett, another early film mogul and one-time partner of Ince, was responsible for discovering a whole slew of film legends whose names you might recognize. People like the Keystone Cops, Fatty Arbuckle, Gloria Swanson, Carole Lombard, W.C. Fields, and the great Charlie Chaplin. Let's talk a little bit about Charlie Chaplin. He was born into poverty in England in 1889. He went into acting, signed with a prestigious vaudeville touring company, and set off for America at age 19. A film talent scout spotted him there, got him hired by Sennett, and the rest is history. That we're going to talk about, because we're talking about film history. Smart, curious, and driven, it didn't take long for Chaplin to develop his iconic tramp persona and begin directing his own films. After finishing his first film contract, Chaplin struck an extremely lucrative deal with the Chicago-based S&E Studios to make 14 short films. While at S&E, he found ways to combine his finely tuned sense of empathy and his recognizable tramp character with a growing ability to make audiences laugh, through both physical comedy and increasingly clever storylines. In fact, he was so popular that by the time his S&E contract was up in 1915, he negotiated an almost unprecedented salary of $10,000 per week with another studio, the Mutual Film Corporation. They also paid him a signing bonus of $150,000, the equivalent of about $3.5 million today. Cha-ching is what they would have said at the time. The movies Chaplin made with Mutual brought him international stardom. They marked the first time his focus on the poor verged into social criticism, a place silent comedies rarely, if ever, went. True to his roots, and despite being one of the highest paid people in the world, Chaplin's films often focused on the gentle, accidental heroism of the downtrodden. Time and again, he made the powerful the butt of his jokes and displayed tremendous empathy for the poor and the humble. Then in 1919, at age 30, he co-founded United Artists in an effort to exercise greater control over his films. I'm 36. I better get moving. What followed was a string of classic movies that rank not only among Chaplin's best, but among the best film comedies of all time. The Kid, his first feature film and smash hit, The Gold Rush, City Lights, Modern Times, and his controversial takedown of Adolf Hitler, The Great Dictator. His later career would be hampered by legal problems and socialist sympathies, which would land him on the infamous post-war blacklist and keep him from making films. But at his height, no one benefited more from the silent-era studio system than Charlie Chaplin, as a director making a lot of films quickly and efficiently, and as an actor commanding enormous salaries and unheard-of creative control. And he wasn't the only one to turn the system to his advantage. Actor-directors like Buster Keaton, Fatty Arbuckle, and Harold Lloyd achieved great success making their own short and feature-length comedies. Stars like Mary Pickford and Gloria Swanson parlayed their celebrity into tangible behind-the-scenes power. Now, as film became more and more central to popular culture, some people started to get nervous. They worried that movies posed a real threat to public morality. They saw films promoting materialism, cynicism, and sexual license. This would be a debate that would come up again and again in American culture about movies or music or video games. Until now, when we've solved all those problems. Is the medium causing society's problems or just reflecting them? A few real-life Hollywood scandals at the time tipped the scales, bringing on the first real self-censorship of American cinema. The gossip press fed readers stories about stars dealing with addictions, affairs, and worse. The most famous of these centered around Fatty Arbuckle, who was accused of the rape and accidental death of an actress named Virginia Rapé. Although he was ultimately acquitted after 3 highly publicized trials, the scandal itself all but ended Arbuckle's career and left an opening for a government crackdown on immorality in films and the film business. Rather than wait for Congress to get involved, the major players in the film industry banded together to form the MPPDA, the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America. They hired a retired postmaster general named Will Hayes, a conservative evangelical, to prove they were serious about cleaning up their act. And that's exactly what Hayes did in 1930, putting together the Motion Picture Production Code, also known as the Hayes Code, a catalog of things filmmakers could and couldn't show on screen. Fun. The code also suggested a strategy called compensating values. The idea was that films could show characters engaging in vice for most of the film as long as virtue triumphed in the end. No one employed this technique better than director Cecil B. DeMille. He was a master at giving the audience all the vice and excess they could handle for the first 3/4 of the movie before virtue came out on top. Other filmmakers found their own ways around the Hayes Code. German director Ernst Lubitsch came to Hollywood in 1922 and made a successful series of witty sex comedies that relied on suggestion and innuendo rather than skin. For many of these filmmakers, however, the Hayes Code was about to become the least of their worries. A seismic event was poised to shake up Hollywood, and not every filmmaker of the silent era was going to come out the other side with their career intact. The world was about to get its first taste of synchronous sound, and it tasted good. Hi, baby. I don't know. Today we explored the silent era, the first golden age of Hollywood filmmaking. We learned about the innovations of Thomas Ince and the rise of the American film studio. And we discussed some of the most important silent era filmmakers and how their scandals, both real and imagined, led Hollywood to institute industry standards governing the content of their films. Next, we'll tackle the biggest shift in the history of film yet, as movies find their voice. As Crash Course Film History is produced in association with PBS Digital Studios. You can head over to their channel to check out a playlist of their latest amazing shows, like the Art Assignment, Gross Science, and PBS Infinite series. This episode of Crash Course was filmed in the Dr. Cheryl C. Kinney studio with the help of these industry standards, and our amazing graphics team is Spot Cafe.
Wow. So, who could compete with that? Yeah. Check out other Crash Course. It's like stunning the way they do their stuff. Digital natives save me from myself. Okay. Well, let's, now we've had the fast version, let's get the PowerPoint version of this, right? So 1939, what a year for movies. Gone with the Wind, The Wizard of Oz, and etc. Anyone remember etc.? That was a great movie. But it was, you know, a good year, as they say. So that's all the way into sound, of course. Let's just see, don't we have anything on the actual structures? Compared to other chapters, our PowerPoints move very fast here. Okay, well, just as well. Hayes, you know, there was a joke in there, but I still think it's an interesting historical parallel in the sense that Hayes was appointed by President Harding, I believe, and there was a lot of scandal and controversy around the Harding administration. So, some members of the cabinet were indicted for corruption, and you know, it seems to be one political strategy to, you know, distract or take attention off of some things is to, you know, get into the morality of public media. As you could tell from, you know, some of the history, Hollywood was far from tame in its pursuit of, you know, crazy and sometimes I don't know, morally troubling pastimes. And so, you know, there was certainly plenty of dirt to scratch there, but you know, it does seem like they mentioned, you know, the movies, the music industry, the video game industry. You know, and they did it to the comic book industry as well in the 1950s too. You know, stirring up sort of moral panic, and then trying to, you know, appoint a czar of some sort to take care of it. So, Will Hayes, the Postmaster General, why, you know, well, partly it was his, you know, religious background. Also, post office had something to do with communications, right? The people who know how to send letters probably know how to regulate the movie business as well, or maybe not. But anyway, Hayes was the front man for the MPA, what is it? The motion picture production. Where is it? It's in here, right? Gosh, they're not even helping us out with this.
Motion Picture Production Actors Association or something.
Let's just have a look. So that would be the later one. Goodness me. I'll have to pop this open. One sec. We'll get that. You can tell I'm going to have to write some extra slides here. Usually we got too much. This time we got too little in terms of what we want to know. The production code was called, so it was the Motion Picture Production Code adopted by the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors Association. So, okay, there we go. But let's just write that up.
It's actually the Motion Picture Association of America.
I think that's the later one, though, right?
It is.
That's the one that gave us PG, R, and X, I think. So the Motion Picture Production Code. And people often call it the Hayes Code, actually. And it was, so the MPPDA, the Motion Picture, well, I'll just put this, Motion Picture Producers and Distributors Association. Let's write it all out. Okay, cool. I think a point to make here is that one of our generalizations that we've been making about media is that, you know, when regulators get involved, very often the industry tries to sort of adopt and police itself rather than have strong policing done by you know, a government agency or something like that. So the Hays Code sets the standards of good taste, but it's the industry itself that self-censors and reviews its content before sending it out. So the MPAA is, you know, the later system is also an industry applied set of standards. It doesn't. They prefer not to go to an external enforcer. So the studios enforce the code. Yeah. So
again, that one is the one that provides the G and the PG and the R. And
that, I believe, is the MPAA. So that is the later one, which is PG and R-rated, X-rated. Those come from the MPAA system. Because that's 1968, right? Versus the Hays Code is earlier on. Is it? The 1920s were, you know, they started to get pretty raunchy.
When the Hays Code came in.
Hays Code, let's just look it up here. Released by major studios from 1930 to 1968. The Hays Code.
The second paragraph there, from 1934 to 1954.
Oh, gotcha. The code was closely identified with Joseph Breen, so he was more of a kind of heavyweight fellow. Let's just see here. There he is. Hopefully he'll talk. No. Silent this, or did I turn off?
Code sets up high standards of performance for motion picture producers. You want entertainment, wholesome, interesting, and vital.
So that's just a quick clip of Will Hays.
It may interest you to sit in with us at a meeting of the Production Code Administration in Hollywood, where we are working for finer and better motion pictures. Our job, as I see it, is quite simple. Nobody expects us to impose upon the public motion pictures which are dull or lacking in vitality or vigor. No intelligent person will argue that we are to make pictures only for children. We must have stories with power and punch and backbone. At the same time, we must be on the lookout for scenes or action or dialogue which are likely to give offense. The responsible men in this industry want no such pictures and will not allow these to be shown. You will understand that our Production Code Administration is not a one-man censorship. It represents the considered judgment of many persons of wide experience and a sincere interest in making motion pictures.
There he is. Rather a dull fellow. But so the Hays Code outlined things like outlawed. You couldn't have foul language in a movie. So this is what they would be looking for. The studios themselves did the self-policing, but got together as an association to make sure, you know, to impose this ethical code. So no foul language. Again, you can feel the society at the time. No interracial romance. That was, you couldn't even apply, yeah, you couldn't even imply it. The film would be pulled. Of course, no sexuality, which is...
kissing.
Pardon me?
Not even kissing.
Not even kissing, yeah. Right.
If you watch like any movie from those years, it's so funny the way they did. But I
get around it.
Yeah, like they would kind of Hitchcock would like do some like make their actors do some stuff that even looked even more sexual than kissing. but they were not really because they were just like touched like their faces together, but they would not be kissing. I don't know. It was funny.
Yes. Okay.
So you couldn't even have people kiss at a wedding in a movie?
I don't think so. No. I haven't seen them all, but you're not supposed to.
Usually it's they just got married, or the marriage ends and the bride or groom running away. They never show the kiss part.
Wow.
If you look prior to the Hays Code, like prior then to the 30s when it came in, you can see, you know, I don't know any of these clips, but so this is from Griffith himself, right? One of the founders of United Artists. But so this is pre-code, like silent films. You could pay and go to see this, and so there are, you know, big crowd scenes of people half dressed and stuff like that. So this is what they were responding against, you know, the permissiveness of 1920s silent film. So the Hays Code comes in and does away with all of this type of stuff. I wonder if we're going to get to any of the bigger crowd scenes. No. Oh, there we go. Steamy. Yes, this is what I was. Okay, sorry.
What is this?
So this is still Intolerance from D.W.
This was
Griffith?
his rebuttal about Birth of a Nation.
How so a rebuttal?
Like, you know, people saw it in such a negative light. He's like, no, that's not what I meant. And then he made this movie
Okay.
as a reaction to it.
Okay.
And,
Feast your eyes.
Yeah.
That wasn't really extreme, though. It was just kind of strange.
Well, I mean, just remember we're talking America of 19, you know, something, right? Yeah. I mean, we're really inured to this. But even in the 1950s, I think that kind of stuff would have, you know, raised eyebrows. Precode 101. So Precode, I mean, there's probably plenty of stuff we could entertain ourselves with, or but so the code's responding to a more permissive, you know, set of stuff. The other thing, you know, in terms of politics, while we're on it, but later, is the post-World War II blacklist, and there were a lot of social progressives in Hollywood, even in the 1930s and 40s, and prior to the Second World War, communism, you know, was viewed as a viable kind of political alternative across the world. A lot of what Stalin was doing in Russia in the 1930s was unknown. He was organizing mass starvation in the Ukraine and stuff. So there were plenty of sympathetic writers, directors, and creative people in Hollywood
It was
who,
Great Depression. People were looking for other alternatives.
right, I mean, capitalism kind of felt like it didn't go well. And the other thing is also there were a lot of Jewish people in Hollywood. Mayer, you know, head of a big studio, and, you know, just many others. And they were aware of what was happening in Nazi Germany at the time. And the communists were among the most outspoken against Nazism. You know, America took a while to get around to responding. You know, there was a very kind of hands-off approach to dealing with that here. So if you were socially involved and upset about that, a lot of people became sympathetic with you know, communist organizations as well for that reason. And then kind of, you know, the whole political calculus flipped after World War II, and, you know, America obviously went to war to fight the Nazis, but the communists became the new enemy afterwards, and a lot of these Hollywood progressives regretted their early participation in communist politics. in the United States, right? And so there were people seeking power in Washington. Joe McCarthy was one that is sort of the figurehead of basically red baiting. Richard Nixon was one of his early aides, and a lawyer named Roy Cohn, who goes right through to Trump in the 1980s, was also an assistant to Joe McCarthy. And so, they organized communist witch hunts, basically, just having people before congressional committees to investigate their background. And Chaplin fell afoul of this. It was because he had been an early communist sympathizer as well. So after The Great Dictator, which is his film which mocks Mussolini, he wasn't really able to make another film easily in the United States. Anyway, he had to leave because he was targeted by the FBI, and others were, called before the House Un-American Activities Congressional Committees, and were, basically asked to testify against others. Some of them refused just on principled grounds, and that would get them blacklisted. Basically, in Hollywood, there was an informal list. Well, informal. I mean, they even had a publication where your name would appear. What was it called? Red. Let's see. Blacklist. Red Currents or something like that. Red Current Recipes. I'm off. Okay, I have to try to find it. They made some pretty damn good cakes in those days. Red Currants. I think it was Red Currants. No, it wasn't. I just looked that up. Okay. At any rate, they even published like lists of communist sympathizers who the studios basically didn't employ, and some famous screenwriters and less so directors. Elia Kazan got blacklisted. Some screenwriters were able to write, under pseudonyms or have other people publish their work in the background to get around the blacklist. Waldo Salt was like a very famous screenwriter. He wrote a film called Midnight Cowboy eventually, which got him kind of back on the Hollywood map, got him an Academy Award. But for decades, these people couldn't get any work. And it took a long time before that was undone. So, and Ronald Reagan was involved in that too. As president of the Screen Actors Guild, he did his share of turning people in, apparently. So that's just part of the history, the political history and the regulatory history of Hollywood. But let's get back into another crash course. This guy talks so fast, but these are so excellent. Dealing with once sound came in, and the golden age of Hollywood studios.
When I say Hollywood, you probably think of big-budget movies, star-studded premieres, and studios with giant backlots pumping out film after film. Most of those associations really began sometime between the 1920s and the 1950s. Once audiences could hear actors speak, listen to pre-recorded musical scores, and enjoy sound effects, film cemented its place as the main medium for mass communication, art, and commerce. And as important as Hollywood was during the silent era, nobody could compete after the arrival of sound. New major film studios emerged, each with their own style and favorite celebrities. Before George Clooney and Jennifer Lawrence, there was Clark Gable and Janet Leigh. This cascade of films led to more technological innovations too, like color film and the widescreen formats we still use today. This was the golden age of Hollywood. Hollywood. Ba-ba-da-ba-da. Okay, I'll stop. After the stock market crash in October of 1929, most parts of the American economy took a real hit, but not Hollywood. And at the height of the Great Depression in 1933, roughly a quarter of the American workforce couldn't find a job, and millions of others were barely making ends meet. So you'd think that the last thing people would do with their hard-earned money was go to the movies. And yet, the Depression was one of the best things to happen to the American film business. That's depressing. In fact, more films were released by the major studios during the 1920s and 30s than any other decade, averaging about 800 a year compared to less than 500 per year today. It was cheaper to go to the movies than a play or a concert, and cinema became a means of escape. As we've talked about, films are an illusion of reality, and that illusion was super attractive to people whose day-to-day reality was often pretty bleak. Genre films became more popular, things like gangster films, musicals, westerns, and screwball comedies. Anything to take people's mind off their own struggles and celebrate good old American values of optimism, resilience, ambition, and courage. At the height of Hollywood's golden age, 5 film studios ruled the town. All 5 were vertically integrated, just like the major studios of the silent era. They each had their own distinct reputations and focused on different kinds of films. First up, we have Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, or MGM, which was the biggest studio in the 1930s. Louis B. Mayer ran MGM with his business partner, Irving Thalberg. Mayer was the savvy businessman of the two. He approved the budgets and oversaw the distribution and marketing. Thalberg, on the other hand, was a former producer and the mind behind the stories and actual production. Together, they made slick, big-budget musicals, comedies, melodramas, and literary adaptations, sparing no expense on sets, costumes, extras, and the biggest movie stars. Think of The Wizard of Oz, Gone with the Wind, and Mutiny on the Bounty. I'm talking opulence, people. Next is Paramount Pictures, which was known as the most European studio because they lured a lot of filmmakers away from Germany and the UK. They also gave these filmmakers more leeway to put their own stamp on movies, hits like Shanghai Express, The Sign of the Cross, and Morocco. Our third player, Warner Brothers, branded itself as the studio of the working class. They churned out low-budget melodramas, gritty gangster movies like The Public Enemy with James Cagney, and musicals set in the Depression like Footlight Parade with James Cagney. The fourth major studio was 20th Century Fox, which made its reputation thanks to its chief director and its most profitable star, not James Cagney. The director was John Ford, who won back-to-back Best Director Oscars for The Grapes of Wrath and How Green Was My Valley, while Shirley Temple sang and danced her way through a string of wholesome hits. And lastly, RKO was the home of the extremely popular Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers musicals. Can I do a dance number, Nick?
Yep.
RKO also took a lot of chances, producing everything from Howard Hawks' screwball comedy Bringing Up Baby to the 1933 version of King Kong, and one of the most influential films of all time, Citizen Kane. Never heard of it. Now, all 5 of these studios dominated the production, distribution, and exhibition of films, for a while. But a U.S. Supreme Court case in 1948, along with the coming of television, signaled a major turning point. In the case, known as United States versus Paramount Pictures, the government argued that the major studios were in violation of antitrust laws. In other words, by owning both the production studios and the movie theaters, they were exercising an unfair monopoly and stifling competition. The Supreme Court agreed and forced the studios to break up their business, sell their theaters, and focus on just production and distribution. Hollywood continued to lead the global film market for another 10 or 15 years, but that near complete control over the industry was ending. We'll talk a lot more about this next time. Now, the golden age of Hollywood saw some major technical leaps in the film business too, including color. Filmmakers have been experimenting with color since the dawn of cinema. The earliest techniques involved hand-tinting individual frames, a painstaking process that had to be repeated for each print of each film. Not great. Over the next few decades, engineers found ways to use stencils to tint films much faster. They also developed other means of adding color, like bathing the film stock in dyes that fit the mood of the scene, called toning, red for violence, blue for sorrow, green for grassy. By the mid-1920s, nearly 90% of Hollywood films were either tinted, toned, or some combination of the two, which was great, except color itself looked wildly artificial. And once Hollywood converted to sound on film technology, the tinting interfered with the film stock's ability to record proper sound. Crash Course Film History. TLDR, it's hard. So filmmakers needed to figure out color cinematography, capturing color with the image. As early as 1861, a Scottish physicist named James Clerk Maxwell, who we talked about in Crash Course Physics, well, I didn't, Shinny did, built the foundations of color photography. The light all around us is made up of a spectrum of different wavelengths, some of which we see as visible colors. Knowing this, Maxwell figured out that all these colors can be derived from some combination of red, yellow, and blue. Beginning in 1906, artists and engineers tried for 15 years to use this technology to achieve color cinematography. But, much like me in high school, they kept failing. Their experiments were unreliable or too expensive. Then, along came Technicolor. In 1922, the Technicolor Corporation saw its first success with a special beam-splitting camera that could make 2 separate negatives. The light entered the camera and was split into different wavelengths, just like how sunlight hits a prism and splits into a rainbow. Half continued straight ahead, while the other half was diverted 90 degrees to produce 2 film negatives. These negatives were chemically treated, dyed either red or blue, and cemented together. Then you could run that final film strip through a regular projector, and voila! Even though they weren't spot on, the colors in these films were more reliable and accurate than any of the earlier attempts. And while that beam-splitting camera was expensive, at least theaters didn't have to buy new projectors to show color films. Over the next decade, Technicolor expanded its system into a 3-color process, with a camera that recorded the original image into 3 separate negatives, red, blue, and green. And by 1932, this process created such high-quality, vibrant results that Technicolor ended up with a virtual monopoly on color film for the next 20 years. Throughout the 1930s, filmmakers and studios gradually began playing around with Technicolor. By the middle of the decade, producer David O. Selznick turned to corner by casting big stars in color films for the first time. And as the 1930s came to a close, Hollywood released a series of high-profile hits that proved color was here to stay. These films that use Technicolor range from the Errol Flynn swashbuckler The Adventures of Robin Hood to classics like The Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind, and even animated features like Disney's Snow White and Pinocchio. Advances in color cinematography would continue to develop over the years, but the basics stayed the same until film stock gave way to digital video in the 21st century. Now, a third technical element of cinema was standardized during the golden age of Hollywood. It's a little something called aspect ratio. That's the ratio of the movie screen's width to its height. Back in 1932, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, the folks who give out the Oscars, established a standard aspect ratio of 4:3, which looks like this. Also known as the Academy aperture, this ratio isn't a square, but it's closer to a square than we're used to these days. That's because most movies we see today are shot in an aspect ratio of 16:9, which looks like this. That's more like it. We often call this widescreen, and so much film and TV is shot at this ratio that most new screens are built to fit it. But those are just two possible aspect ratios. Back in the 1950s, some filmmakers experimented with an extreme widescreen ratio called Cinerama. This process involved shooting a film with 3 separate synchronized cameras hooked together in an arc, and projecting it from 3 synchronized projectors. Weird. The screen was shaped in a similar arc, kind of wrapping itself around the audience, you know, for a real immersive experience. And the final aspect ratio of Cinerama was about 8:3, which looks like this. The most famous film shot in Cinerama was the Western epic How the West Was Won. But, as you can probably guess, this process was too expensive and complicated to achieve widespread use. It was bad for performers' necks. On the heels of Cinerama came CinemaScope. Rather than shooting with multiple cameras, CinemaScope utilized something called an anamorphic lens. This was a special lens for cameras that recorded a wider image but squeezed it laterally so that everything would fit onto standard 35mm film stock. When the film was projected, a similar lens attached to the projector would unsqueeze the image, expanding it back out and projecting it up onto the screen. The result was an impressive 2:55:1 aspect ratio. Audiences got their first taste of it in the 1953 biblical epic The Robe, and by the end of that year, every major Hollywood studio except Paramount was licensed to make CinemaScope films. Over time, the ratio was reduced to 2:35:1, and in the mid-1950s, the American film industry had almost entirely converted to shooting anamorphic widescreen films. It took some time for filmmakers to adjust to widescreen shooting. When you move from an aspect ratio of 4:3 to 16:9, that's a whole lot of extra room to fill. So what do you do with it? Well, we fill it with, like, knickknacks and stuff. Close-ups, especially of faces, became difficult to frame, while landscapes got easier. At first, widescreen films rewarded composition and long takes over editing. Filmmakers built their stories by filling the frame rather than cutting to new images. Genres like the Western, the musical, and large-scale epics all lent themselves to these kinds of world-building possibilities. In the end, the technical advancements of sound, color, and an aspect ratio that could surround the audience made the powerful Hollywood studios the center of the cinematic universe from the late 1920s to the late 1950s. It was a golden age whose echoes are felt in our films today. Today we learned about how the American studio system took advantage of sound film and the Great Depression to achieve global dominance. We discussed the development of color cinematography and what it meant for filmmakers and film audiences. And we examined aspect ratio and how the move to widescreen cinema affected films being made. Next time we'll learn about how filmmakers in Europe and the United States reacted against the formulaic movies coming out of Hollywood and created a new wave of gritty, irreverent, and innovative cinema. Crash Course Film History is produced in association with PBS Digital Studios. You can head over to their channel to check out a playlist of their latest amazing shows like Blank on Blank, PBS Spacetime, and Global Weirding with Katherine Hayhoe. This episode of Crash Course was filmed in the Dr. Cheryl C. Kinney Crash Course studio with the help of these aspect ratios, and our amazing graphics team is Thought Cafe.
So what do you think might have been one of the reasons for studios, for movies to go to those wider aspect ratios?
To make more money?
I guess so.
Put more audience members in seats.
Sorry?
Put more audience members in
Okay,
seats.
sort of similar answer, right? They're in the business of selling tickets. They want to make more money, right? What's their competitor at that point?
Live theater.
TV.
Live theater and TV, true. But TV as well gives you, TV still has the Academy ratio, right? 4:3. So by, you know, once movies are dealing with, okay, there's another visual medium everybody can see, you know, stories told on television, they've got to up the sort of experience of going to the movies, and that's why they go to Cinerama and then CinemaScope. Is, you know, it just looks so much bigger and wider and better than your TV. So I mean, that's something that we're still seeing. I mean, lately You know, like the move to 3D television, for instance. You know, where and it's, you know, following on from 3D movies, but that kind of, okay, we've got to do something to you know, to keep people interested in the medium. I don't know if you guys, anyone up on movie sound, like Atmos? Anyone go to an Atmos movie theater? Doesn't really matter to you? How about IMAX? Would you go see IMAX? Yeah, Richard too. Yeah, what preferably it would. So what was the latest IMAX movie? Did anyone go see Blade Runner 2?
No, I should,
Nope.
but I didn't.
In IMAX or just like in general?
I think I saw it in IMAX.
You saw it in IMAX? Yeah, I wanted to go see it. I didn't see it. But that was the one that I was you know, most thinking about. Okay, there's a visual experience that I really want, so I'm going to go out. I'm not going to wait for it on video. I mean, I didn't do it anyway because I was too busy, but I'm not going to wait for, you know, to watch it at home. I'll go see it on a big screen with cool sound and stuff. So, I don't know. Well, this is leading on to a little discussion we've got going online, which is a pretty simple way to gain some extra points here, I got to say. But just one more thing about this before we kind of finish off on the lectures is the importance of the antitrust laws, which broke the monopoly of the movie, you know, these big vertically integrated companies which produced the content and also owned the theater chains where the content was shown. So this, of course, you know, was broken apart by the antitrust laws, which said, okay, you know, your dominance is too strong here. You can basically cut anybody out of any part of this business. You can say, you know, oh, you're a competing studio? Well, we won't show your movies in our movie theaters, you know, so what do? I mean, that would require you, if you start a new movie studio, to either distribute with one of these guys, and that's where most of the money comes from, or, you know, what, you're gonna like buy up your own cinema chain and then, you know, compete like that. So this is the reason for it's the logic behind splitting up these big production distribution monopolies, basically, which it's just too hard for competitors to enter into the business, you know. So I mean, this still comes up in discussions about, you know, could a Facebook happen today, given their, you know, gigantic subscriber base? You know, could that still happen? So this is these, you know, in discussions about current media operations, it still comes up. In Europe, for instance, Microsoft was forced to stop distributing the Explorer browser with Windows and stuff. So there's still the threat that when a company becomes too dominant and too large, that it'll get broken up just based on that. And so it's something to keep your eyes on still in terms of like what's going to happen to Google, what's going to happen to Facebook, maybe even Amazon, which seems to be stealthily creeping up to, you know, be one of the most gigantic companies. And yet, you know, Apple can make the devices and now enter into television production, and I don't hear too much complaining about that yet, but I guess these are early days. So, but interesting to keep your eyes on that antitrust thing. So I mentioned a pretty easy way to get some points here. So this is an online discussion, so this would be easy for those who are streaming the class too, because we don't have a mandatory get-together date until the final exam. So this one is just sort of reflecting on what's going on with movies now and why you still go to movies, if you do. And so, you know, when I think about going to movies myself now, it's largely, you know, kind of because I want the full movie experience. I want a giant screen, I want good sound and stuff like that. But perhaps there are other considerations. You know, if you go with your family, is it a date night out? I don't know. So this is just kind of an open question to discuss. Okay, you know, what what brings you to the movie theater still? And are there movie genres that you go to that are more attractive than others? Any thoughts on that? I mentioned horror or superheroes.
Superheroes.
Yes?
Marvel movies.
Marvel movies? Yeah, that would bring you out.
I think that's like the only time like I've gone to the movies. I mean, yeah, pretty much. Just I don't know. I can't really watch action movies at home. I watch scary movies at home, but I watch like yesterday. No, yeah, yesterday. Or it was Sunday. I don't know what day. Like I went to go see Justice League. I don't know. So I thought, it's gonna look better. It's gonna sound cooler.
And I bet it did.
Yeah, no, yeah, it was a good movie.
Yeah.
Although they made Batman look like trash. No, they did. It's kind of sad. And yeah, so yeah, I like watching scary movies at home, or in the movie theaters too. But then I don't know, action movies, like I don't really watch them at home. It's not the same. Like.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just I guess large. It's the screen, the sound, and having people jump alongside. I mean, that's. The one reason I'm attracted to horror is, just to when everyone's scared at once, there's kind of a vibe there.
Yeah.
Richard, did you want to say something?
Everybody's scared, everybody goes like, ah, and then everybody goes, ah.
Right, exactly.
Everyone laughs at
Whereas watching a scary film alone on Netflix at like 1 o'clock in the morning, it's just you, and it's not as much fun.
Corners get darker.
But IMAX, it has something. I don't know. IMAX has something. Just watching a movie like Marvel or Justice League or even like any action movie, it's just amazing.
Yeah.
I just feel in general watching any movie in the movie theater is better because of the whole big screen, the whole sound, because these auditoriums are built that way so sound can help us experience the movie way better than at home. It's just going to the movies is very expensive. That's the main thing that's makes it hard. But in general, if I could watch every movie in the movie theater, I would, even if it's not scary movies or action movies, just in general.
It's interesting you mentioned the sound because we put so much emphasis on the picture the whole way through. The sound is a big deal.
It's like you feel it.
Yeah.
I think another part of it is that because we're so attracted to our phones and devices nowadays that if we're watching a movie at home, it's a lot easier to just do that. And then if you're in a movie theater, they're like, don't do that. They strongly force you not to do that kind of thing, and in a way it helps you keep in the experience of the movie, which is...
That's an interesting point. It kind of channels your attention.
And that's the original point of the movie in the first place, is that it's I can't remember the term that they used to describe it, but you're supposed to, the movie is supposed to keep you engaged in the experience the whole time. You're not supposed to be disconnected.
Very immersive.
Yeah, from what you're saying.
Yeah, because now when you watch at home, it's so easy to just pause the movie and then go and...
But that's a convenience factor, right?
Yeah, of course it's convenient, but
But it does take you out of it as well.
Yeah.
If if I want to watch it, I don't even like watching trailers because I don't want to know anything. I want to watch the whole thing. I don't want to know spoilers. I don't want to be distracted. That's why I like going to the movie, even though I barely go. But yeah.
And then there's background noise too. If you're sitting there and you hear a car go by, then you'll probably get distracted by the car.
Right. What about audiences?
Knocks on your door.
What about audiences that make noise?
There it is.
There's a quote. The length of a film should be directly related to the endurance of the human bladder.
Very good.
So that was before you could pause things in Hitchcock's world.
Yeah, I hate struggling to hold that in and wonder, is this a good time to go out and go to the bathroom?
There's actually an app that tells you when is a good time to go.
How are you supposed to?
Are you serious?
Is it supposed to give you a quote? It's supposed to buzz you?
Funny.
I think I can go to the bathroom.
I was hearing people talk about Blade Runner. They said it's 2.5 hours long, the new one. It's oh my God, okay. We're gonna have to be sure we go to.
Especially towards the end when there's like the all the rain and the water. And like,
it's torture.
And
It's triggering them.
Beer at the movie theater, that's bad too.
Oh yeah,
Alamo Draft House.
The Alamo Draft House.
That's not a good idea.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, it's
be able to
pretty
order
good.
cocktails and burgers while you watch.
I went to a movie there. I thought, wow, this is awesome. This is great.
where's this place?
Alamo Draft House.
Oh yeah, it's expensive.
It's
though.
expensive.
Mission,
That's
Mission and
the old
20th.
theater
Yeah.
experience. I love it.
Mission and
They got all the
20th.
runners
Check
with
this
the.
out.
The screen is fantastic. The sound is great. Everything about the place is amazing, and they have good food. You just
Yeah.
you put like a ticket out with what you
Just
want.
write it down.
They just come. They bring it to you, and your money goes like that.
Yeah.
But even if it's a bad movie, like you're watching Suicide Squad, you don't care. You're just having a good time. Versus,
I guess if
wasting $30.
you're drinking, so it kind of
Absolutely. Yeah.
like it's more acceptable now to watch a bad movie.
right,
And they're
right.
super strict. Like you can't be like 5 minutes late. Like
Yeah, they don't want you
You have a
sitting.
reservation, yeah.
They won't let you in, and that's. I mean,
Yeah.
at least you get your money back, but you know that's kind of cool. Like you got to be on time.
Yeah, there's nobody gonna walk in front of you.
So and that brings the other side of it, where it's crowded. The movie theater's huge, especially if you're coming on opening night. So it's just like, man, I don't know if I want to have that experience of if somebody's loud in the theater or is on their
Right.
phone or whatever it
Right.
is, and that just takes me out of it, losing that immersion. So I'd rather wait till a movie comes out on retail if I really want to watch it, unless I feel like I'm going to get spoiled about it. So I gotta watch the next Star Wars movie, or because I feel like I'm going to read something or notice something or see a headline somewhere that says, "Why did Luke do that?" Like, dang it!
I know, yeah. So spoilers creeping in, right?
Yeah. So I feel an urge to watch certain movies, but other movies not so much. But at the same time, if it is a movie that I know I want to get that theater experience, like Mad Max Fury Road is a movie I had to watch 3 times in theater because it was just so magnificent in my eyes, you know. But you know, it just depends on the movie. Same thing for Blade Runner. Yeah.
Gotcha. Daniela Dengino?
I used to work at a movie theater for like a whole year, and even though we got like free tickets, I didn't go watch any, you know, because the same thing. I was like, I get really annoyed if there's like a lot of people talking and stuff. So I would just wait like 3 weeks, 2 weeks, depends on how popular the movie was. And then like, okay, I'm gonna go watch it, and when I know that there's barely gonna be anyone in there.
Isn't that the best feeling when it's only 10 people?
Yeah,
in
but
there?
I
Like,
do
oh, yeah.
want to watch it like in a big screen. It's just not with a lot.
Not with a lot of people, yeah. Well, the way the business goes now is like huge opening weekends or weeks, and then it goes pretty
Yeah, I'd rather
fast.
avoid that for sure.
Yeah.
But like when I was a kid, I used to go watch all these like big movies, like Batman movies and stuff. Like I would be the first one in line, like that crazy. I will never ever do that ever again.
How about you, Gino?
This is gonna sound pretty cynical, but from my understanding is that like nowadays there's a lot of really lackluster content coming out in movies. So it's a lot of like, oh, let's remake this movie from like the 80s that nobody wants to see, right? Like didn't they do just like a Point Break remake or whatever? And they did a bunch of other ones. And then there's also just like a lot of unoriginal films where it's a lot of like, let's take this gimmick that we've had like 40 times or something and put it into a movie. Again, change up the plot maybe slightly. And it's this sort of recycled content that's just kind of dumped back into the theater.
Like The Mummy?
Yeah.
That was the
There's
dumbest
another
movie.
one.
They
Oh, did it?
They remade The Mummy, yeah. And with was it Tom Cruise?
It was Tom Cruise. They're trying to do a dark universe where they're going to have the Mummy and the Dracula and all these things in there.
Everyone's trying to repeat the Marvel success.
Exactly,
right?
but it was just poorly put together. So the movie just
Must have been
didn't
an
work as well.
expensive thing to
I love
mess
Tom
up.
Cruise movies. That was bad. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's an expensive miss, I guess.
So maybe that's
Very
why
expensive.
like people don't really go as often now.
Yeah.
But like
I have
there's just all this like meh content.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think some of it has to do with studio risk aversion. Like there's only so much that we're interested in seeing repeated, but what they're looking for is kind of a surefire thing where if they're going to spend $150 million, you know, they're not going to take a risk. Pardon me?
They're not surefire.
They're not surefire. Yeah.
Well, you know, they want to
Most,
follow the
big
Marvel formula, like you
blockbusters
say, which is very successful right now.
Like,
Yeah, they're looking to do that.
So DC's or Warner Brothers is trying to do it, and
Yeah.
they're hanging in there.
Well, they seem to be, now that they're jettisoning Zack Snyder, they seem to be maybe finding
Finding some sort of ground to it maybe.
Oh yeah, that's right. They did that live action Ghost in the Shell.
Okay, Micah, I want to hear what cyberpunk
I like that movie.
we're getting.
Really? Yeah. But I was impartial about the anime, so I was like, I don't know. Yeah. I said I was impartial about the anime, though.
Can we wrap this up? I'm glad to see that people have something to say. So get in there and start some discussion. And like I said, it's a ready way to make some points. This one is going to close on December 5th. So you got some time to get in there and talk. Okay.
You're just looking. Oh, it's a.
She wants to read it online.
Is it?
Yes.
So it is a discussion. Okay.
It's an online discussion. Okay. Just because I'm tired of trying to work things out, so we can do it in class and outside of class. Let's do it all outside of class. Okay.
Right.
But clearly, a lot of people have a lot to say. So do get in there once and then go back and see if someone's responded to you and follow up. Okay. Cool. So next class we'll talk about second half of media, of movie history. Get into this blockbuster dominated universe we're in now, and maybe watch another Crash Course. One a day, I think, is about all we can do with it. See you later.